Hello and welcome to the TelecomTV Summit on the Green Network. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content, and coming up now is our discussion that seeks to answer the question, how green is the distributed cloud? Well, increased use of the cloud, whether public or private, means bigger data centers and more of them, especially with the rise of edge computing. So what can be done to make energy-hungry cloud platforms more efficient? And to what extent are such efforts impacting the decisions being made by telcos about their cloud and edge strategies? Well, let's find out what our guests think, and I'm delighted to introduce Javan Erfanian, who is Distinguished Member of Technical Staff at Bell Canada and also an NGMN board member. Beth Cohen, SDN Product Strategies at Verizon. And Tilly Gilbert, Principal Consultant with STL Partners. Hello everyone, very good to see you all and thanks so much for taking part in our discussion today. Now, data centers have a reputation as being huge consumers of energy. So does the move towards more use of cloud platforms and resources help or hinder the telco's green agenda? Tilly, perhaps I could direct this question to you first, because I know you've been doing a lot of work on the edge and the distributed cloud.
Yeah, it's a really complicated question. There's no easy answer to that. I think there is some evidence that moving more to the cloud may be green. It may be able to reduce the amount of underutilized appliances, for example, that exist, and instead we would run more common off-the-shelf hardware, which can run a variety of workloads and hopefully therefore not hang around underutilized. So there is evidence that it could help to drive a greener industry. On the other hand, as you say, a lot of this depends on how green the cloud practices really are. So no simple answer to that question, and hopefully we'll dig more into that in the rest of the panel.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tilly. And as you say, this is a very complicated area here. Beth, I'll come to you in a second, but Javan, let me ask you first. What's your views on this? Is this going to help or hinder the telcos with their green agenda?
Well, good response already, but I don't expect it to hinder. It's a challenge that we all have to be mindful of and work towards, and it's an part of the end-to-end agenda. So in a way, everything that we do in terms of distributed intelligence, reduction of footprint, disaggregation, and so on, and softwareization, cloudification, this is part of an end-to-end way of actually going towards energy efficiency and also coming up with trends like, heating and cooling trends and other things, renewable energy to address this. So I do acknowledge that it's a challenge that we are all working towards as a community. And of course, Bell Canada has already indicated, plans to, in its own operations, to be neutral within a few years, and we got the first North American ISO certification for the management system. But we need to work as a community end to end in all the scopes of 1, 2, 3 to make this address. And those who also run the clouds and are aware of this and mindful of this, and of course there's an increasing traffic, increasing data, and data centers have been at the heart of that. But the trends are in the right direction.
Thanks, Javan. Beth, we are moving to the cloud. We are putting more and more of our resources to the cloud. So this is going to happen anyway. So as Javan said there, it's more of a challenge, isn't it, that we have to face and overcome?
Yeah, I think certainly we are moving to the cloud. And I want to use a little bit of history with some numbers. So back in the early 2000s, a lot of companies, including the telecoms, although less so, moved to virtual platforms, which was sort of the first step to getting into the cloud. And virtual platforms pretty much across the board was getting about 30%, sometimes 35% reduction in costs, heating and cooling costs related primarily to more efficient use of the hardware. As I used to say, there were a lot of spinning disks that were sitting out there doing nothing. And the cloud really is a story about making more efficient use of the hardware resources themselves. So I would expect as the telcos move to more and more of our networking workloads into the cloud, I would expect sort of similar reductions in or increases in efficiency. Although one difference is, of course, at the telco level, networks are running all the time. So we don't tend to have as many idle processes sitting around that can be consolidated. But certainly, making use of the hardware as efficiently as possible is key to reducing our footprint and making for a greener network.
Thanks, Beth. What about the edge cloud then? Tilly, edge facilities are physically smaller. They've got lower footprints, use less resources, but they've also got other complications and there's added complexity with edge. So does the edge represent a greener approach than the centralized cloud?
I don't think we have clear answers on this yet. On the one hand, I think the centralized data centers, they benefit from an economies of scale. They have many of them pretty efficient HVAC systems for keeping things cool. And so in some ways, distributing further it may not be helpful from a green perspective. Because you are then, replicating and running workloads at a number of smaller, less efficient sites. On the other hand, there probably are benefits just from not transmitting as much data back to centralized data points and instead filtering some of that information at the edge that can have benefit in terms of carbon emissions. And there's also some evidence that having smaller numbers of servers, fewer racks, with a higher surface area per server may also reduce the cooling requirements. And cooling is one of those major energy consumption sides of the data centers. So I think there is some evidence that moving to the edge could be greener, but it's all about the way that operators do that, the efficiency of the encoding, the ability to share those hardware resources, as Beth said. Getting all of that right will be really critical in distributed edge being green.
Yeah, good point, Tilly. As you say, it's the execution and the operation of these strategies that's going to be so important, and we'll soon find out, I guess, over the coming few years as to just how green and efficient they actually are. Well, let me move the debate on a little bit here and ask the question: what innovations do the network operators want to see from the vendor community that can help make distributed cloud platforms greener and more efficient? Which in turn would no doubt impact their cloud strategies and choice of partners for the public cloud and data centers. Beth, any innovations that you would like to see the community get stuck into?
Well, the elephant in the room is, as Tilly said, the biggest expense is the cooling, right? You don't heat data centers, you just cool them. However, we need to relook at the hardware itself and making it more efficient to run. Because I think that has been something that I think most of the hardware vendors have pretty much ignored. And, they continue to create toasters, and we have to continually cool those toasters. So, I think looking at the chips themselves and seeing how they can be more efficient. I know there are ways to do it. We have mostly moved to an x86 environment. However, there are other chipsets that do run cooler, and I think that's something that really needs to be looked at in a new way to really cut those emissions. Because if we can keep the hardware cooler, run it cooler, then we don't have to cool it with power by air conditioning it.
Thanks, Beth. And Tilly, your views on this?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, looking at innovation is really interesting, but from an energy usage perspective. But we also should consider scope 3 quite significantly in all of this, and think about things like the circular economy. So not just about making new hardware require less electricity to run or to cool, but can vendors do more to enable refurbished equipment to be used to extend the life of existing equipment? So I don't know whether you count that as innovation. I think it should be counted as innovation, maybe in a slightly different way. But I think that circular economy side of things is really, could be really critical to bringing down some of the scope 3 emissions, which are, the most significant emissions for almost all telecoms operators. It's sort of, 70-80% of their emissions are scope 3. So yeah, it's a different form of innovation, but one I think should be flagged.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for that. Javan, what about innovations that both you at Bell Canada are looking at, but also, in your role at the NGMN with its large operator membership, what are you all asking for?
Yes, very similar to the responses which were just given and the last comment. It takes an end-to-end effort, and it's, as you said, as Tilly said, a circular economy, that you look at everything. For example, at Bell Canada, we look at eco-design, we look at operation, we look at fleet modernization, we look at cloudification and reduction and softwareization and reduction of footprint, and as well as renewable energy for increasing number of cell sites and so on. So it does take an end-to-end effort, and I agree with earlier comments as well that, for example, the cooling, which is really the challenge of heat generation to address, should be addressed end to end, from the chip design to the instruments and so on, and equipment and operation. So as was said, it takes our operation, our partners, as well as the entire impact. So it's well said, and these are the challenges that end to end we have to look at in terms of circular economy, refurbishing, as well as renewable energy, and of course, energy efficiency itself.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for those comments. Now, I've got a related question. Do we need to take a longer-term strategic view and perhaps work harder to ensure that, for instance, 6G network technologies are designed from the outset to be substantially more energy efficient and emission efficient, and utilize more green-friendly architectures? Should we be looking ahead and trying to build it in rather than spend too much time with what we've got currently? Javan, let me come back to you and ask you to start us off on this one.
All right, sure. I as you would agree, it's not either or. A lot of the efforts we have already made as a community and also as Bell Canada have been in the last number of years. We have even exceeded our promises in terms of reduction and so on, and the number of kilowatt hours of renewable energy used as such. And of course, a great deal of move towards disaggregation, eco-design and modernization and so on, agility of the network in the sense of footprint. So you can see that the work is already started. And in fact, as also Arash, our board, the chairman of the board at NGMN, said in one of your interviews, we have to act now, as well as a continued effort, because even if we promise something for our scope 1 in the next few years, as the distinguished fellow panelists mentioned, this also takes an end-to-end work towards the scope 2 and particularly scope 3. So the work has started, and it will continue, and it is indeed one of the pillars of and one of the imperatives and one of the main requirements that most are including NGMN have identified for full 5G and beyond, and so-called 6G.
Yeah, thanks, Javan. Beth, as Javan's just said there, it's not a question of either or, is it? Yes, we can make strides with our next generation of technologies and innovations and R&D work, but we've also got to focus on what we've got today.
So I'd like to talk about that specifically because when Verizon's rolling out our 5G network now, and I know we just announced that we're going to be turning it on for 100 million people on the 19th. So very opportune, and the 5G networks, particularly fixed wireless, is really an opportunity to really drive out energy, a greener network, because there's a lot of cost savings in terms of not having to maintain a very complex physical plant that goes out to every single building, which also is greener, of course, just by its very nature, and of course the equipment is greener as well. So I see a lot of opportunity to just with 5G, reducing the energy footprint based on fixed wireless alone, which is very exciting in so many ways for our green network, for our efficiency, for reduction in maintenance costs. All of these are, every time you have to run a truck out, you're burning energy. It's the little things that add up, as Tilly mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of elements, a lot of factors at play here. Let's move the discussion on again and look at our use of energy and the role of clean energy or green energy or alternative energy sources. Yes, we're currently using them throughout our networks and our businesses, but can they really replace traditional sources for the distributed cloud? Tilly, have you got any views there on the use of alternative energy to help us with our green agenda?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely relevant. We're seeing more and more operators already moving to alternative or greener energy sources. The other thing that may be possible with moving more to the cloud is moving less latency critical workloads to be run at data centers that are more easily able to run on electricity from renewable sources. So there are some geographies where it's simply easier to access solar or wind, etc. We might see this as telcos virtualize, that they shift workloads to regions with greener power, and this would be particularly relevant perhaps in the US, for example, where there is, you can have one operator in a market where there's quite a lot of variation between the ability to access green energy. So I think it's clearly a step that operators can take to help to reduce their overall carbon footprint in their data centers.
Thanks, Tilly. Well, Beth, footprints don't come much bigger than Verizon's footprint. So what's your view on alternative energy?
Absolutely, we can take advantage of alternative energy. And I think it's actually an opportunity at the edge to use alternative energy because, I was talking earlier about the reduced power consumption footprint, but there's also an opportunity to stick solar panels, on these pieces of equipment. Why not, run our little, 5G cell sites with a little, those solar panels stuck on top. I mean, the highway signs in my area all have little solar panels. So they're already green, and I live in an area that only gets sun about 2/3 of the time of the year, over the year. So, and it's still worthwhile. So, so I think again, small things multiplied over large numbers and large areas really add up to a lot of reduction in energy.
And Javan, is it becoming a strategic imperative for operators to implement alternative energy and also look at the consumption of energy and, as Tilly says, move around some of the workloads?
Yes, definitely. As it's a part of that circular economy we talked about, and it's not today a question of total replacement. It's the question of how we can achieve the goals, including the carbon neutrality goals in short term, and how increasingly we can introduce these. So certainly, I agree with the comments already made by Beth and Tilly. This is an end-to-end initiative that the footprint has a role, and an increasing number of use for energy, renewable energy is important. And the example of edge, it's not separate from the network; it's just an distributed intelligence where and when needed, and therefore it's linked to being more efficient and increasingly more intelligent. Intelligence is a big part of this today, and as we move forward to the next decades. And finally, I'm sure you may touch on this. I mean, it's also important to indicate the role of ICT on other sectors, right? How we provide intelligence and monitoring and so on to do a better, care of our resources. Like, for example, we have IoT in both precision agriculture as well as water systems, resources, fire hydrants, and others. And these have a lot to say, even with the UN Sustainability Development Program. So the edge is not just ICT, but also the entire piece that we have responsibility for and we care for.
Yeah, good point. Thank you very much for that. Beth, we've been talking about the edge quite a bit during our discussion, and about the transport of data. And if the edge helps reduce the amount of bit miles, if you like, therefore transport costs, energy costs are going to come down. But is transport really the issue here? Is that what's consuming a lot of the energy? Because we're also hearing that passive state equipment consumes huge amounts of energy. So are we better off focusing more on those issues rather than the transport of data?
I think it's a mixed bag. Transport is expensive. And getting back to the circular economy, you have to so there's overhead costs of installing the pipes, whether they be wireless, but we've had to replace all the equipment to support the wideband wireless. So it still makes sense to bring it locally, and I think that there's been a lot more focus on low energy data collection devices in the IoT market. I'll give an example related to what Javier just talked about, which is California has a water crisis, and the California water meters are monitored, and they use some telco equipment to reach out to those water meters, and they identify users of water that are out of line with normal usage, and California actually goes after them to make sure that they are meeting the water usage, staying within the water usage boundaries. So a lot of people who had fantastically green lawns and were watering them in the middle of the night, so hopefully nobody would notice. Well, the water company did notice and would come after them and charge them. So you can be pretty you can get pretty sophisticated about reducing your energy footprint in so many ways, and reducing water is one of those ways toward a greener planet.
Which is exactly what we're after. Tilly, in the work you've been doing, the research work you've been doing, are you seeing that the edge can help reduce transport costs, and therefore, as Beth said, transport is expensive. We can reduce costs. Operators can help their financial balance books and balance sheets at the same time as creating a more greener network.
I think filtering data at the edge may well be more efficient. I also think that there's strong evidence that 5G technologies are more efficient at a sort of bit transported level. Where the real challenge lies is in the general increase in the amount of bandwidth that's being used by people, and the general increase in the amount of data that is being transported, and that will happen with 5G, and may even be encouraged and partly stimulated by some of the use cases that can be delivered by 5G and by the edge. So overall, it's hard to say whether they will definitely help to bring down the energy consumption of telecoms operators. But on a sort of equipment efficiency level, I think both Edge and 5G can deliver gains for operators.
Yeah, as you say, we've got to improve our efficiencies at a faster rate than the overall level and increase in traffic is going up. It's a tricky one for operators, this. Let's finish the discussion looking and going back to innovations and how strategically we can change our approach here. Javan, let me start with you. Can innovations perhaps in chip design help make distributed cloud platforms greener? Or are we better off focusing on, for example, continued disaggregation and software-enabled innovation?
Well, I'm going to be predictable and say all of the above again. And notice that innovation, this is really something that is in all directions. That's probably why we also need some kind of a global benchmarking so that we can also see our progress and share, and also create a strong ecosystem and diversity we can all benefit from. But it takes everything. Even when we talk about data centers are not just about cooling, though cooling is front and center. But and I'm not an expert in data centers per se, but everything from the capacity that they provide versus the energy used, the energy source efficiency itself, the cooling source efficiency, the softwareization and how it adapts, how it can use less wires and things. It's going in every direction. And I also like to highlight other sectors like instrumentation, monitoring, measurement, metering is a big part of this, because notice one of the major things ICT will also be a part of is intelligent monitoring and therefore optimization of all activities. So when we talk about transport, it's not just yesterday's mindset about transport. Let's say if Bell's IoT is helping a gas station, and in the sense of, for example, its level of resource and level of inventory and so on, that helps optimizing the fleet. And that is an example in many different sectors. So yes, to make it brief, it's in every direction. Use of renewable energy for instruments, for cell sites, the cooling that was very well said, the chip design, and so on. That's why we focus first on our own operation and deliver, but also work with partners for an end-to-end thing. And as NGMN and other bodies, including those represented on this panel, I think we need to work together on a pre-competitive way to make a strong ecosystem, benchmark, share, and encourage diversity of design. And there's a lot of innovation and new business opportunities out there. It is going to create prosperity just by what we're talking about right now.
No, you're absolutely right. Collaboration is absolutely essential here once again. Beth, you spoke earlier about innovation in silicon, for example, but as we look to make our distributed cloud platforms greener, what about the continuing disaggregation efforts, and what about the work we're doing in software-enabled innovation?
So software innovation, I think we have more control over. So interesting. I was a big fan of hardware and software disaggregation for a long time. And I have actually kind of come a little bit full circle on it because my experience with hardware and software disaggregation with the development of the universal CPE is that it's never as disaggregated as you'd really like it to be. And so I'm thinking now that we're probably going to reinvent the toaster and kind of circle back to appliances, particularly around the edge, because again, you can drive more efficiency and lower energy consumption with these types of models.
Beth, I think you just opened up a whole new summit for us there to focus on this year. We'll come back to that later in the year because it's a very interesting way to end. We must end it now, though. We're out of time. We must draw our discussion to a close. Thank you all very much indeed for participating today and sharing all your views. And if you're watching this on day 2 of our TelecomTV Summit on the Green Network, then don't forget to send us your questions and we'll answer them in our live after-show programme. That's later today. And please, if you have yet to do so, take part in our online poll, which you can find below this video player window right next to the Q&A app. For now, though, thank you for watching and goodbye.